Good morning, Snow.
Good morning, MJ.
MJ and Snow in the mornings. We usually don't do this.
It's early for us.
My brain's still waking up.
Yeah, it's early here in Arizona. But we did this for a very special reason.
Yes, we're happy to do this.
Yes. Welcome, Daniella, Mastic Young, author of The Culting of America and Uncultured.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
Thanks for being here.
yeah. So let's start off. I mean, we live in probably one of the cultiest towns in the United States. Our most famous resident, Brad's resident, was Tim McVeigh.
Oh.
I remember hearing about him when I was growing up in a cult in Brazil.
So that was about the time frame you were in Brazil at the time. Can we start off with give us a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, so I was born into 3 generations into a cult called the Children of God. The Children of God is pretty famous both because they took evangelical Christianity into religious prostitution and pedophilia, and also because a bunch of celebrities came out of it, Joaquin and River Phoenix and Rose McGowan, etc., because we were essentially a bunch of performing children.
I didn't know Rose McGowan was in it, but I did remember when they would always talk about River and Joaquin. And what didn't he go by Leaf back then?
Yes, I think they all had very interesting like nature names.
Yeah.
And how long were you in this cult?
I grew up in it until I was almost 16, and then I got myself sort of kicked out by breaking the biggest rules, which was having a boyfriend from outside of the cult.
And that came, that was your epiphany. What was the epiphany moment? Like, I need to, maybe what I'm involved in is not good.
So I had a couple of epiphany moments, but I would just start by saying, like, I don't feel like I ever believed in it. Like from about the age of 6, there's this moment in my memoir, Uncultured, where I'm getting very harshly punished, which was very normal for us, and just being like, this is silly. Like, I just have to play this game until I can get away. But I had another very interesting moment on 9/11, which was, watching, it was literally the first time I had seen live news on television. And because we had almost no exposure to the outside world, and I'm watching this happen, and I'm watching my parents and the people in the cult saying, this is God's judgment. They're praising God. And I'm watching this horrible thing happen. And then I hear the term religious extremists, and my little 14-year-old brain was like, are we maybe one of those? And so that was kind of the beginning for me of trying to figure out how to get away, because the thing about being 3rd generation is my grandparents were in the cult and they were leaders in the cult.
Yeah, when I had read that in your book, or I actually listened to your book on Audible, but that part when you were talking about that and how your family like made a cake and whatnot because they thought it was the end of times, I was like, whoa.
Well, it was one of my siblings' birthdays, and we just like had a birthday party like normal on 9/11, which I think is just so, I've met many other people who were born on 9/11 and none of them celebrated their birthdays that day.
Yeah, I have 2 people in my family. They were actually born on 9/11 several years after. Very weird.
I've got a coworker who's currently pregnant, and that's the day she's due. And I'm like, hold it in an extra day,
right?
Please.
Yeah.
How difficult was it to actually leave, though?
I mean, I got in trouble. I got in trouble sneaking out of the commune, and I got caught. And there was a 6-week period where I was kind of imprisoned in my room while they were figuring out what they were going to do with me because I was only 15. And, I wouldn't find out till later, but my family considered leaving the cult so that we could all move to the US. We were in Mexico at this time. But ultimately, my mother had been married off pretty young to an older guy in the cult who had a bunch of older kids. And so one of my older step siblings, whom I did not know, agreed to take me in. And so I ended up being, taken on a bus from Guadalajara, Mexico to Houston, Texas, and dropped off by my parents there, which was very, very shocking.
And you talked a little bit about what happened when you saw the cult you were involved in on the news.
Yeah, so, and this part is weird for people because it's like I didn't know that I grew up in a cult. I knew that I grew up in this organization called The Family, and I didn't want to be part of it anymore, and so I left. There was this definitely this knowledge of like we're growing up in a group that's not like everyone else. We are the soldiers of God. We are the family, and I want to leave the family. And so I had left. And, my first day in high school, there's 4,000 students, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm from another planet. But I didn't have any sort of context for thinking about what the group was until 2 years later. I'm 17, I'm a junior in high school, and all of a sudden there is a murder suicide on television, and it is the Children of God cult. So the son of the founder ended up going to seek revenge on one of his abusers and then taking his own life. And so I'm just standing there hearing them say on the news, Children of God cult, Children of God cult. And that was when it hit me. And my literal thought was, oh, I grew up in a cult. Okay, that's what's wrong with me. Like that was the first time I had like context. And then my next thought was like, oh, no wonder we spent so much time talking about how we weren't a cult.
I think, yeah, listening to Uncultured, it's like it sounds like you had like knowledge of there being other cults that existed, but your cult was very adamant about like letting you know that that's not what was going on with you guys. Like,
yeah, I mean, we had whole doctrines labeled we're not a cult, and like the outside world calls us a cult, but here's why we're not a cult. And when the Branch Davidian standoff with the FBI happened at Waco, like we were watching that whole thing, or at least being told about it, like they didn't put the TV on or anything, but we were hearing about the whole thing. It's 1996, I was about 10 years old, and there was this whole thing. I even write about it in Uncultured because they were like, we are not a cult. See, these guys are a cult. However, this is what the evil United States government will do to us if they think we're a cult. Right. So it was very like, I mean, cult was probably the worst word you could say in the Children of God, in the family. And in fact, when I would later go on to write my college entrance essay, which the prompt was, what makes you different? And I actually called this essay, I was raised in a cult. And it was like so hard for me to write that and like admit that, and I would not go on to talk about it for another 10 years at least.
What was it that was hard about admitting? Like, was it still like a little denial, or did you have like shame attached to that feeling, or like what? Like, or were you just like still processing and coming to terms with it?
I think in part it's because it's such a loaded term, but I also think in part it's because when we leave a cult, we don't know what we're supposed to do. So the only thing we know to do is like try to fit in and try to act like everyone else. And I've noticed this is a trend in cult memoirs that like we'll be like, nope, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But when we need to pay for college, we pull that story right out of our back pocket, So we do know, at least subconsciously, I knew that I had a very extreme story. And sure enough, I did, get a bunch of scholarships from telling that story.
And then your desire to like your subconscious desire to want to belong to something bigger was kind of what led you to the military. It sounds
I
like.
mean, probably, but it was definitely a lot more
Mm.
subconscious than that. Like I look back now and I'm like, so I did 4 years of high school and two, and then I went straight to college where I was working 1 to 4 jobs because I was essentially completely indigent. And I graduated valedictorian without ever having been in school before, which is two things here. One is that the one step up that I think that cult babies have is we know how to work really, really hard. We can outwork almost anyone else. And number two, like looking back, I'm like, yeah, I put myself in my own sort of high control, high demand environment so that I wouldn't have to think of anything, of all the trauma I'd experienced. And not to mention, we're told our whole lives growing up that if we leave the children of God, like we're going to be homeless on the street, flipping burgers at McDonald's, doing drugs. And so I was like, forget it. Especially because my family was famous and I was a famous child actor within the cult. So I was like, everyone is hoping that I'm going to fail and come crawling back. So like spite and hard work, I
Fight
got
is a
through
great
this.
motivator.
But I
I love that as
also,
a motivator.
yeah, but I also fell prey to what I now know is called a 1-1 cult, which is a abusive and controlling relationship. And,
Oh,
this was actually the hardest chapter of my book to write, was like talking about how I fell for this dude in college. And that was a big part of what pulled me into the military, was he joined the military and I was sitting there going, like there was some part of me that was like, I'm not going to be his trailing spouse, I'm not going to just be like he thinks he's so much better than me because he's a soldier. I can go be a soldier too. And so I did.
I was like, I think, or what was I gonna say? I read about that part in your book that wait, do you have some?
No, it's not.
I don't remember what it was. I don't know. Say.
Yeah,
Like,
I've always wanted to ask this question about, like, I watch a lot of the cult documentaries. I've never seen one on the Children of God yet, but I don't think like Netflix or any of them have put that one out yet, which I don't know why. But anyways, the like with cults, what is their justification? Like, because all of the documentaries, they're all pedophiles. Like, where are they? What is the correlation between like religion and pedophilia? Like, where do
Yeah.
they get this from?
So first, I can give you two reasons that there's no complete Children of God documentary. And one is people are like, you just can't put pedophilia on the screen. I was told that about books. Like we can't tell your story because it's too awful. And the other one is that the Children of God rebranded and then performed twice in the White House in the 90s. And I don't think anyone has been
Oh.
quite willing to take on that story. But, to your question, like first of all, it took me a really long time to figure out why I had so much in common with ex-Mormons and kids raised in purity culture. And that is absolutely because purity culture and pedophilia culture are the same thing. It is an obsession with the sexuality of children. But, cults are all about exploiting bodies and getting power, right? So it's about getting your labor and having power. And nothing makes you more powerful than if you can abuse children and be fine. And so, in my opinion, that's why, these men it always comes down to assaulting children, which of course
yeah,
is sort of what we're dealing
I was
with at a
like,
national level right now.
like, I was looking up, like Googling about the cult and whatnot, and that was something that made me really mad. Was I feel like every article that came up, like sane washed it, like where there'd be like controversial polygamy cult, instead like they didn't mention the child rape or like to me, I feel like that's really doing an injustice and a harm to people affected, because it's trying to minimize what's actually going on. And the media has such a, you know, like they should have a responsibility for how much of public perception they shape, but that's something I find frustrating.
Well, and also I think that the media in some ways focuses entirely too much on the sexual abuse. Like, the only thing we know about the children of God is that they rape children. And what I tried to show in my book is all the other abuses, and even like, so chapter 1 is about corporal punishment. Chapter 2 is about the split personalities of our parents. Chapter 3 is about the programming of the children and just growing up as little soldiers. Chapter 4 is about medical neglect and abuse, which was in many ways probably worse than the sexual abuse that a lot of us suffered. So, I think that, so I got this on both sides of my story. We can't talk about the child abuse, it's too horrible, and we can't talk about the way women are treated in the military because it's too horrible, and we don't want to have to deal with that. We want to be able to think of how cool the things you did in the military are. And people, I also just think like people are very hesitant to talk about a group of shiny white dancing children who are talking about Jesus and missionary work and then say like, no, this is a really evil cult, because I think it would also call into question what I try to do with my story is, as soon as you realize that the children of God really was as evil as it was, the next thing you're going to have to do is look at the Mormons. And the next thing you're going to have to do is look at the evangelical churches.
All of them, the Catholic Church too. I mean, like I was raised Catholic, and then I pretty much told my family I was done when all the stuff came out with the altar boys. I was like, this is not right. But like the stuff on the thing that bothers me that too about like the Branch Davidians and Waco, they don't, at least like the people around here, or maybe they just don't care about the pedophilia, but that was like one of the major things about it. Cause like when you hear about Waco, all they ever talk about is like the shootout with the government, and the government was trying to take their guns or whatnot. But like there's one of the reporters that was actually there, Brian Karam. He always like he'll go on a couple of shows I listen to, and he's like, that wasn't even the real story though. The real story was that David Koresh was having sex with 12-year-olds. And they don't care about that. And these people who are anti-government, if you tell them that, because I had a lunatic ex that was this like obsessed with the Branch Davidians, I'm like, he was having sex with children. It's completely.
I have said this I've said this in this exact way many times. Like, the only way we talk about what happened is to talk about government overreach. And I've literally thrown books about it across the room and stopped reading them because I was like, they're literally acting like they were doing nothing wrong. And he was here raping 12 and 13-year-old girls. Like, the government absolutely needed to go in there. The government absolutely needed to go into Ruby Ridge as well, right? They just, they don't know how to do these things without
that's kind of part of the extreme of like the ends justify the means mentality or something. Like we have to have like, limited government overreach even to that extent when it comes to children.
The government, in all fairness, the government probably could have done it in a better way. But if you watch like the documentaries on Waco, like the government, the people who are in the documentary from the government actually will admit that things weren't handled that well.
Yeah.
The folks who are still Branch Davidians, like to this day, will not admit it. They take like they don't see anything wrong with what David Koresh had done. Nothing.
And And what happened with David Koresh too is this very good example of when I say that like sometimes cult leaders precipitate their own apocalypse. Like David Koresh was absolutely going to have his apocalypse one way or the other. And he
Right.
even says, right, when they hear that the raid is incoming, he says, it happens. You know, like
Right.
he was gonna go down with that ship in one way or the other. And
Yeah.
you know, this is true about apocalyptic groups in general, right? Like they want the apocalypse to happen. I write a little bit in Uncultured about how disappointed my cult was when Y2K came and passed and the world wasn't plunged into disaster. Because, you know, and this is kind of similar to explaining to your family why you want to go deploy to war as a soldier. This is because when you spend all of your time preparing to fight, you want to fight. And that is what really becomes dangerous about these groups, you know. And I think the only reason that the Children of God wasn't stockpiling weapons is because we were all over the world and that would have been too complicated. But other than that, like, I mean, we were absolutely ready to fight the government and die for our faith. And people were expecting that to happen all of the time. Like we as children grew up just marching and being programmed to be soldiers for our faith.
Wow.
How long into the army did you start to realize the similarities that there was cultish aspects?
First day. First day. Well, I would say so there's first of all there's a week when you get there, which is called reception. And reception, it's the same thing they call your first week in prison. And this is when you're just like going through the steps of like standing in line to get your ID card, standing in line to get your uniforms. You know, you're sort of, I describe it as systematically being dehumanized and being entered into the machine as a piece of equipment. And then you get on the bus to go to basic training. And there's this thing that they do. As soon as the bus stops, they just start yelling. You all have to get off the bus and you have to go stand in a square and you have these 50-pound duffel bags with all your gear in them. And then you're going to hold them over your head for 2 to 3 hours while they yell at you. And it's this really, really important part of basic training because it's impossible, right? Nobody can do it. So, and that's what cults need. They need you striving for an impossible goal. In a cult, you're always bettering yourself. You're always bettering the world. You're always on mission trying to get something done and striving, right? That's how they push you to work harder. And then the second one is it's irrational, right? None of you three have probably ever gone outside and held 50 pounds over your head for 2 to 3 hours.
My
And
shoulders hurt
there's
thinking about that. I can't.
Just thinking about
there's
it.
an important thing about once we do something wacky for a group that we want to be a member of, we are very likely to do more irrational, crazy things. You can think sororities and fraternities and hazing and stuff like that, right? And sure enough, that's what happens. Like that day, like when I realized, like, so I'm holding this duffel bag over my head, they're yelling at us, and I'm like, oh, I just joined another cult. You know, and that's the prologue of Uncultured. That's how we open it up. But then my next thought was like, okay, I'm going to be better at it than the rest of these suckers, right? Because I know how to do this. I just got to click into it. I got to get with the program, and I just got to, you know, play this game 100%. Exactly like when I was a teenager in this cult. And sure enough, it was like we all either pushed through that event, and those of us that did were the ones that made it through, besides those who got injured in basic training. But there are always, you know, 3 to 5 people who just give up and go home that night. You know, we'll do a sort of performative suicide attempt and then go to the drill sergeants and be like, I can't handle it. Send me home. And that's like, so it's, you either kind of decide that you're going to let them break you or you don't do it.
At what point did you like realize that it might not be the healthiest for your mental health to like continue in that cycle and like decide to kind of like deconstruct from that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from my first day in the Army, at basic training, I was like, okay, this is what it is. I'm gonna
Like a
play this
little,
game.
was
I'm
it
gonna
like a
do
little conflicting emotions where you're like, I could be the best at this, but also like, this might not be like the healthiest for my mental health. And then you
I
just,
didn't think about it as unhealthy, but I thought about it as like, yeah, I'm going to be the best at this, but also I'm not like committing to this for life. It was actually
yeah.
kind of hard to get through the first 3 years. And then I decided to stay in after I could have gotten out. And, I tried as hard as I could to be a true believer in the Army. That being said, I was also the intelligence officer, and the intelligence folks are the experts on the enemy. And like, we are the devil's advocate, right? Everyone else, when the commander says, go do this, everyone else jumps to how we're going to do this mission. We are the ones that get to say, sir, you're going to die. Like,
Like
maybe you
you're
don't
like
want to
the
do that.
anti-yes
So
man.
it was, this was also me figuring out that, like, I think that I can be a good group person, but my life shows that I'm incredibly bad at not being an individual and questioning the group. I just happened to go in. So I was like, first of all, they're going to judge us on running. Okay, I'm going to be the fastest runner they've ever seen. And I eventually ran a 5:15 mile, right? Like, I was very fast. So I was like, I'm going to perform amazingly. But then also, I'm going to be a really good intelligence officer, which is the person who gets to question everything. So it wasn't really until, there was a couple of things. I deployed twice back to back, sort of like a year deployed, a year at home, and then a year gone. And realizing that the job that I loved was only great when I was at war, and then the rest of my life sucked, especially as a deployed woman. But then when you're home, your job is like checking locked doors and making sure everyone has a secret clearance. There's not a lot of enemy air threat over Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So it was kind of like, well, do I really want to do this? And then finally I don't want to give it all away, but they sort of decided to just crash and burn my career while I was deployed. And that was when I was really like, oh, okay. It doesn't actually matter the fact that I've spent 6 years working my butt off for this unit. It doesn't actually matter. We're told in the beginning, we're like, you as a lieutenant, they don't care what you want, right? You got to pay your dues to the Army. You got to do your stuff. And so I did. I went into the 101st, right? The most famous unit in the world. I deployed twice, and I was still, I got denied for like 4 different jobs that I wanted to go do. And I was just like, okay, so this is all a lie. Like, they just are going to do whatever they want with me. And so just it wasn't so much one moment, I think, as just understanding that, like, yeah, this is not the life for me.
Like probably, I imagine it was, I imagine that like being raised in such a way made you like kind of uh like I can't think of words. Like attach your performance to your ability to have the group accept you, like is that
Yeah,
I mean, I bet that was really hard
that's sort of
to
what growing up in a cult is. There's no unconditional love. You are only as good as you can perform. And that's pretty much exactly sort of what happened in the Army. Although, even though I was their best performer, they were still willing to just sort of like throw me away. And so I was like, oh, it's all a lie when the group says that they're going to take care of you, right? When
probably like the familiar but disappointing feeling, huh? Like how did you work on like building your sense of inherent worth after going through all of that?
Well, so first of all, I will say, it wasn't until I decided to get out of the army. And then it's a process, right? Which is really funny because other cult experts have tried to be like, well, is the military really a cult? Because you can leave. And I'm like, excuse me. It was harder to leave the US Army than it was to leave the Children of God. It took me 6 weeks to get out of the Children of God. Takes 6 months to a year to get out of the US Army. You have to file paperwork and ask permission. That permission can be denied, as happens to me in the book. And during that time, right? So as soon as I said I want to get out of the army, it was like the parallels to the cult couldn't have been stronger. They were like, remove me from my job, go sit over there, don't talk to the other soldiers, don't, infect them with this idea of a life outside. All of my senior leaders telling me that I was going to fail in the outside world. I remember one of my senior officers being like, so what are you going to do? And I was like, oh, sir, I'm going to go to Vanderbilt and get an MBA. And he just looks at me and goes, you think you can just waltz your way into an Ivy League institution? And I looked at him and I was like, sir, I'm a woman captain who deployed twice, who has a 4.0 GPA. And you're here trying to tell me I'm going to fail in the outside world. Not to mention I came to a new country with $0 in my pocket and got this far already. And you're trying to freak me out. And anyway, I didn't end up going to Vanderbilt, but I did salsa dance my way into Harvard. I didn't waltz.
Really, that's awesome that you, through all of what you endured, had the self-esteem to not let those gaslighting people get to you when they're telling you you're going to fail. Like, I feel like that's like really cool that you're able to maintain that through all that.
And that might be one of the positive things that I got out of a cult. One of the reasons I think that people join cults is because they give you this sense of superiority, that you're just better than everyone. And I just always believed that I could do whatever it was that I wanted to do, even when there was no reason to believe that. But I mean, at this point in my life, there was no reason to believe that I would leave the army and not be successful. And yet they were all trying to really scare me. And I was just like, I don't, the parallels here are too strong.
Yeah, we don't want to give away too much of the book. Go get Uncultured, a great book. But the newest book, The Culting of America, I didn't realize how much the United States is really based on cult mentality.
I would say neither did I, but I do think I've been seeing the parallels for forever. When I was sort of dropped off in Texas in 2003, I was starting to understand that okay, what I came from was pretty extreme. And when you say Children of God to people, everyone goes, whoa. But there were clearly a whole bunch of kids my age who had been growing up in or were growing up in some very similar kinds of extremism. And one of the things we look at in the book is we've only defined cults as a pejorative thing in the very modern world, right? Post 70s. And yet, if you look at the Puritans coming to America and Jim Jones going to Jonestown, those things are the same. We are taught this nice little story in school that they came here searching for freedom of religion, which is basically the opposite. They thought that England had too much freedom of religion, and they were looking for a place where they would be free to practice their religion, and their religion said you weren't free. And the Puritans are the ones who came up with the concept of universal education. All kids go to school. And it was so that they could indoctrinate their kids to believe what they believed. And I think that has really filtered down into American society. And then also, it was very interesting for me when I did go to Harvard. It was during COVID when isolation was pretty rampant, which is a big cult thing. But I studied organizational psychology, and I don't think people realize how connected cults and the military and corporate America are. Because in the late 60s, the American government discovered brainwashing, right? When we were getting back our prisoners of war from Korea, who had learned it from Mao's China, right? And the American government said, can we do this to our soldiers, right? And so they hired 4 psychologists who studied cults and abusive relationships to build modern day basic training. And so, you know, in the 70s, just as the discipline of organizational psychology is getting started, these men who are studying organizational dynamics are going to the military to study the military and then take those concepts and what works to corporate America. Meanwhile, the military did it by studying cults. And I think it comes pretty full circle with very recently finding out that Peter Thiel, right, one of these big tech billionaires, has a course on how to build a cult, right? And this was kind of my experience in studying organizational psychology. Was first me realizing, like, I'm already an expert on bad guys. I think I'm going to stay doing that. You know, like, grew up in a cult, studied terrorism, anti-terrorism, deployed with that. And I was like, I'm just going to keep focusing on the manipulation and the coercion. But meanwhile, I'm noticing that, like, everything that we're studying in school is cult tactics, for lack of a better word, right? Influence and motivation tactics that all of my colleagues are going to take and sell to corporate America. You know, and I just think all of these things are so much more connected than we think. And one of the things I learned as an intelligence officer was it doesn't actually matter what you call a group. You study their tactics. You know, that's what we learned in this 20-year war, was like, it doesn't actually matter that we spend all this different time talking about this cell versus that cell. And so that's kind of the approach that I took to looking at cult tactics in America. You know, I say this book is not a book that calls out certain groups as cults. It does, but that's not the primary focus. The primary focus is I'm going to show you these 10 cult tactics, and then I'm going to show them to you in things you recognize as cults in the US military and then in regular groups in America. And I really, truly don't think it matters if we can put a title on that group. And in fact, we usually only are willing to call a group a cult when the media does it after we can measure the damage in bodies.
And kind of currently
Yeah.
what's going on with this administration.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't necessarily call the Trump people a cult, but I have for years now. I mean, like
I do call MAGA a cult.
Okay. Yeah.
And even more so since the book was written, I feel like many of us cult experts, you know, I've said this to the news several times, like, we are not being hyperbolic when we call MAGA a cult. This is an exact, and in fact, I think Trump really followed a pattern similar to what the founder of Children of God did. Was he showed up in a time of cults. You know, Trump didn't start all of this. A lot of these groups had been building in this way since the 60s and 70s, showed up in a time of cults, and then collected all of these lesser cults into his cult of personality, which is exactly what David Berg of the Children of God did and how he built a 10,000 member cult so quickly.
Yeah, that's probably why he's good at it, because, like, businessmen, like, business is kind of really cult-like too. I mean, they're always, like, coming up with those phrases, like, you need to spend money to make money, and they've got, like, all, like, you know, wanting people to be part of the team, and you got to do this for the team and whatnot. Probably why he's
And they all study each other, you know. I'd like to say there's a reason that Donald Trump has always surrounded himself with evangelical pastors, and it's not because of Jesus. It's because he was learning their way of speaking and influencing and you know, bringing people to have these emotional feelings, which all of these are cult tactics, you know.
Yeah. Is the Children of God cult, is it still operating, or has it dissolved?
Yes and no. In 2009, they kind of, I think, reached their tipping point. So the way that cults die when it's not a big conflagration is when they fail to keep or recruit the next generation. And in 2009, the Children of God, I think, is one of the first cults that the internet kind of helped to kill, right? They got on the internet very early on to use it as a recruiting tool and a selling tool, but it also gave us connection to the outside world. And so in 2009, the woman who was running it since the death of the founder was kind of like, you know what? Jesus told us that he might not actually be coming back in our lifetime anymore. So all this stuff that we have told you for 50 years about being constantly prepared and keeping your kids out of school and not working real jobs, like, just kidding. You all should go get jobs, and they're saying this to 60 and 70-year-old people that have devoted their whole lives to this cult. And they're like, we'll still be here. We'll still, be your church. And so it really kind of fell apart in 2009. And we actually came up with a term called never lefters for a lot of the people who joined the cult and even some who grew up in it, which was kind of, they never had that crack in the brainwashing. The cult just kind of fell apart around them. Something that I think is going to happen with MAGA whenever we get the big, beautiful burial. And I maybe wrote a deconstruction workbook to go along with the book, like thinking of, 77 million people, hopefully some of whom will wake up. But I will also say that the majority of the people who joined the Children of God in the 70s are like full MAGA now, and this brings us to sort of cult hopping, which is, when we don't deconstruct like what it was about us that drew us to the cult or to these high control systems, we just continue to look for that. Which also brings me to the point that, from the outside, people think that extremism feels horrible, but it doesn't. It actually feels great. It feels great to people when they think they're on the right path. They're being guaranteed that they're on the right path. They're surrounded by people who look and think just like them. And they have this mission that is just worth sacrificing their lives for. And that's actually what happened with the Children of God, was they like destroyed their mission. And that was sort of what brought the cult apart. Now, why I say yes and no is because my grandfather still runs the money for what is left of the Family International. They still have their websites. They still have probably about 1,000 people out there living in developing nations around the world, still doing their thing. The leaders are still out there doing their thing, but it's not the 10,000 person army of God with communes all around the world that it was when I was growing up. Like I can't go back to the cult the way that Mormons can like go back, ex-Mormons can go back to Utah. Like it doesn't really exist in that way anymore.
Yeah. So is the Children of God basically the longest running cult then?
Oh no, the Mormons for sure.
Oh, true. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
But also Scientology was started in the 1930s. And between Scientology and the Mormons, I think those have had immense influences on America as well. Like people don't actually realize how much Scientology has influenced like Hollywood, the military, and American corporate culture.
I have a question with that one, whether people like genuinely believe that, or if they're like going along for the clout of it because of being able to have proximity to the influence over so many things. Like,
I mean, there's two different kinds of cult joiners. There are the true believers, and those are the only ones we usually ever talk about. And I think 80% of people that join cults are the true believers. And then there are the people kind of like you mentioned that they want power themselves. And so they're joining it for proximity to power. Sometimes I think these are like failed narcissists, like they weren't able to build their own thing, or they're just not charismatic. Like Jeremy Spencer of Fleetwood Mac, who joined the Children of God cult, was just not charismatic. but his fame and his money made him a very important leader in the Children of God. And so he stays there. You know, Tom Cruise of Scientology is another one. But the reason that cults work is because most of the people are true believers, you know, so most of the people doing the brainwashing are true believers. You know, the army takes their best sergeants and sends them to drill sergeant school to go, you know, break other people down. So it keeps going because the majority of people do truly believe in whatever it is. But I also think Scientology is such a good example of it's not the ideology. Any ideology can be used to manipulate you. It's the tactics, right? Like you can just write a science fiction novel and make that your worldview, and that's Scientology. You know, and it's funny because I used to think Christianity was the problem. You know, when I was 22 and I was a lieutenant and I was like safe in my first job is when I like Googled Children of God cult, you know, and started reading everything I could about us. And then I went over to, you know, the fundamentalist Mormons and the regular Mormons. And I really was starting to believe that like, oh, Christianity is the problem. And then I read Jenna Miscavige's memoir, Beyond Belief, about growing up in Scientology. And I recognized my own childhood, specifically the child labor. And I was like, oh, it absolutely doesn't matter what worldview they are using. It's the tactics and it's the control and the exploitation.
It's interesting how many like pipelines that are not as obvious, but they lead down the rabbit hole into like conspiracy and like MAGA and QAnon. Like I've watched things about that and it's like fascinating, like even health and wellness and new age. It's like they've kind of co-opted even like new age religion stuff. And
I think one of the problems is the stereotype that we have of cults is religious cult, right? I don't think Nexium would have gotten as far as it gotten if people understood that it can be anything. You know, we have in 1995, Margaret Singer, who's like the grandmotheress of cult studies, not Margaret Sanger, just someone different, but Margaret Singer, you know, she writes that the Marine Corps can't be a cult because they make you exercise and cults don't make you exercise. And first of all, I was exercising for 2 hours a day, military style in 1995. But we now know that exercise cults is a whole category of cults. You know, to your point, the new age, it's sometimes called the woo to Q pipeline, you know, where it's like they find people that are already seeking something, you know, and one of the things that I say now is anywhere in the space of personal transformation, predators are going to show up, you know, kind of like anywhere that kids are being cared for, abusers show up. So like this can be exercise, diet, sobriety, losing a loved one, moving, going to professional school, you know, like because you're already showing up ready to change everything about yourself. And the biggest one here that has been the most controversial is large group awareness training. So like Landmark, EST, and anything that ends in Oni Robbins, sort of using these same exact tactics, but without any version of religion, all about being self-help. But then they're going to start manipulating you right from the beginning.
Yeah, like, did you see the documentary on the cult of Mother God?
Yes.
Like, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Like, that's one where, yeah, she takes that silver stuff and she ends up like
silver.
Yeah, she ends up like blue at the end of
I
it.
know people around here that
Yeah, that are way into that.
yeah.
Insane. I was like, I know people that take that. They haven't turned blue yet, but
And this is what, you know, this is what I think contributes to the stereotype of like cult brainwashing being like this magic thing that's done that turns you into a robot automaton and just makes you believe things that nobody else would believe. When in reality, like, brainwashing is just a systematic process to get you to stop asking questions. And also, people believe in the worldview of cults because they want to. You know, I really believe that the reason it's impossible to like wake people up from brainwashing is because we buy into our own indoctrination. You know, so that cult is giving that person something. And until they realize that what they're getting from it is not worth what they're giving up, they're going to be willing to believe just about anything.
I know we're getting a little bit short on time here. You got time for a couple quick questions here?
Of course.
Okay. Knitting Cult Lady on socials. How much backlash do you get from people on your socials?
Well, I'm a woman talking about the military, and I am an expert who's very secure in my area of expertise. But cults is a topic that most Americans think they know a lot about. So I get quite a bit of pushback. That's for sure, especially because I'm trying to help people realize that the most extreme cults have these parallels in everyday accepted groups. But I definitely get more people understanding and connecting their own stories to what I talk about than pushback. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, no, that's
Taylor Swift. Seems like you're a little bit disappointed in her lately.
I am. I'm using my own workbook to deconstruct Swiftianity, but I spent a lot of time on this because I was a Swiftie for 20 years and I understand cults pretty well. And I'm like, it's not a cult. I don't think fan clubs are actually groups. I think being a fan is an identity, and it's even in like the language, right? We say being a Swiftie, whereas people say being in MAGA, right? I think that being a fan is an identity. And one of the things I realized from using my own workbook was like, I didn't see her as a leader, and it kind of bothers me when people say they put people on pedestals, they worship them. And I don't think that's true. I think we are identity merging. Like, I saw Taylor Swift as an alternate me. I'm 18 years old, struggling just out of a cult. I'm not a princess. My life's not a fairy tale, but I can look like that and I can sing those songs, but there's something else that's important, which is no amount of fanatic behavior makes something a cult. And that's the parallel that people are seeing is fanatic behavior. But cults are groups that are using coercive and manipulative tactics to exploit your labor and your body. And like for me, once I understood that, I was able to completely understand my childhood and also to understand how it's different. Now, are there cults populated with Swifties run on a Swiftie ideology? Absolutely. But is just being a fan of a celebrity or a sports team, that to me, that's not even a group. That's just an individual identity that we sometimes act out in a space together.
Why do you think she's not pushing back on the White House using her music in some of his videos?
I mean, I think that that's part of why I'm disappointed with her. I think that she has been deceiving her fans her whole life, starting with the fake country accent. But I also think that once people become billionaires, it's probably not right at $1 billion, but I think there's a level of money that you get that is dehumanizing, that separates you from the rest of humans. And I also think it's pretty significant that she changed her speaking out right after she got her master's. And I think that was the first time in her career that she actually knew where all her money was coming from. And I think that money speaks loudly. I did see today that she muted him from using her songs, though. So I think she's, still trying to keep up this appearance of I'm the good one. And almost like keep a foot in both camps.
Yeah. What's up with the knitting thing? Where did that come from?
So my mom taught me to knit when I was 5, and we sort of did a lot of crafting whenever we had the materials. And then when I was 18 in college, I took a freshman class that was on like how to be a college student. And I took my first learning test. And they were like, okay, so you have the most different learning style. It's called body kinesic, and you code things in through movement. I was like, okay. So I went out and I bought a book stand and some knitting needles, and I just knit my way through life. When I got on the internet, like I'm hyperlexive, which is actually a form of dyslexia. It's just the good one. But I have always had to do something with my hands to like keep the words on the page, keep my brain on the page. And so when I got online and I would read parts of other people's books out loud, because I'm not trying to be a cult leader and make it all about me, I would be knitting. And then it turned out that people were really obsessed with the knitting. And I was like, okay, I can do this all the time. And now it's become a cool thing. You know, I chose the name Knitting Cult Lady because that's what people were calling me. And it has sort of become a thing where we're just knitting this all together. You know, we're taking out the bad stuff, we're knitting stuff together. I make jewelry now. I make these collars that are called love bomb collars, where I crochet or knit onto existing jewelry. And then I teach people about what love bombing is. And so it has kind of become a nice full circle to my brand.
What are you knitting right now?
I'm knitting what we call a cult coat. It's just a coat made out of fuzzy stuff. And when I was watching Taylor Swift perform Karma, I was like, I think I can knit something like that. And so I started doing it.
I think it's neat how like part of your deconstruction and like finding your own identity is like experimenting with looking different ways and fashion and whatnot. And
yeah, you know,
we're actually gonna, after this show, we're gonna demagify Sarah here because I'm a hairstylist.
Well, no, because I don't want to be MAGA
presenting and so she needs some.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. Yeah. You know, you asked me if there was a point when I realized that I needed to like find my own identity. And that was after I wrote Uncultured, and I realized I was like, oh, I never got to form my own identity as a child. And that's what I need to go do. And it's called delayed adolescence, right? And we go out and experiment and do colorful hair. But it's also been an interesting answer to me about culture, because I'm not from anywhere. You know, I was born in Asia and I grew up in Latin America, which has tons of African and indigenous influences. And I, you know, was like adopted by an Indian family in college, and I don't have a hometown. And so it was very confusing for me for a long time. And I thought I was just supposed to present as what paperwork says that I am, which is like white girl from Texas, but realizing ultimately, like, I don't know how to be that. So I'm just going to be myself. And putting together my own clothes, I make almost everything that I wear, is part of, you know, my culture is everywhere, and I pull inspiration from everything. The Love Bomb collars started off from a Mexican artist, which is where I spent 2 years of my teenagehood that were very significant, even though I'm not Mexican. So it's been interesting, and it's also fun to be colorful, and nobody thinks that I voted for Donald Trump with this hair. So
Right. Yeah, no, they've been on threads. They complain about, like, there's tons of threads about, like, I'm tired of these liberals with their tattoos and their colored hair and blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, note to self, I got to throw some color up in this hair.
Well, and here's what's great. I get so many hate comments about my colorful hair from MAGA that it pays for my colorful hair. I think I literally make about 10 grand a year from them telling me how stupid my hair is. So
I feel like it's fun. It's fun, and it's like a good litmus test to be like what's not expected sometimes too. Like, I don't know. And like the litmus test part is like especially where we live, it's just like if people look at me and judge me to that extent just on something as silly as what my hair looks like, they're probably not people I want to really deal with in my life.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's a big
this is
lesson.
exactly how I feel about my brand online. Like, I am fully aware that when I'm sitting in a sparkly corset knitting, like, I don't come off as a former Army captain with 2 best-selling books and a master's from Harvard, but they didn't have to underestimate anyone, and I know who I am, and it's like fun
Yeah.
to play with
I love that.
stereotypes.
Yeah.
I love it. I secretly, like, part of me hopes that maybe that'll like trigger some kind of like thought process where they can start like questioning and being more like self-aware. But part of me is like, probably not most of the time.
Well,
But like,
I don't think it's
that's like
going
a
to work
dream
on your
though.
like fully in the cult people, but I've had a lot
Yeah.
of people be, especially older women, be like, "Yeah, I really judged you for your appearance at first, but now I totally get why you're doing what you're doing." You know, they're like, "I stayed around long enough to listen, and now I
Yeah.
totally get it." You know, it's like I use my body, my appearance, it is mine, and I'm allowed to do whatever I want with it and exploit it in any way that I want to. And like for the first time in my life, I like to say, like, I'm the only one exploiting me, you know, like all of my
Yeah.
stories are mine, my body's mine, my hair is mine, and I can do whatever I want with it, which is really freeing.
It's like
Yeah.
the men that complain about that, but it's like, it's the consent part. It's you're consenting to being the one to decide how much of yourself you're willing to give. Like, it's not other people expecting you to take it from you, you know? That's what
Exactly.
makes the difference, I think.
So what's next for you? 2 best-selling books. So what's next?
All right, this is really exciting. I've written a musical.
Oh, cool.
And it's called Cult Baby the Musical, veterans included. And it is a 3-hour show that I've been writing like on my social media for a year and a half. And we are hoping to record a 3-song mixtape and get it out this Christmas season. And it is literally a show, you know, and in the zoom out, it is the story of my life. It is a young girl growing up under extremism and performing, and then women in the military performing, but then also see it cracking up and deconstructing. And then it shows you how healing works, but it also gives you all the secrets to brainwashing, and it's funny. And it's, you know, one of the things I realized from writing Culting of America, which is a research book with 400 endnotes, I read all the experts out there, and you realize that all cults are the same. And most experts say this in one way or another. So that told me that there's like a generic language for the experience of being a cult, and especially growing up in a cult. And I was like, oh, this is what I'm doing with my life, is helping to create this language for this thing that we all experienced, you know, and using my extreme story. Like, everybody agrees that the Children of God was a cult. And so then I can put language to, you know, I say to children, for example, like, if you were held back from the world that you should have been growing up in, or if you were told you're in this world but not of this world, right? Like, you're not from the culture that you were growing up in. And that's something that people need to understand, you know? And so coming up with these terms and this language and setting it to music is, I think, sort of my next thing. And just exploring all the different ways we can talk about the experience. Like, first I did a memoir, then I did a research book, and now I'm doing song and dance. And I took a bunch of music from the cults that my dad wrote that is super good and sold millions around the world, and I set it to my songs. And so it is like taking their songs, sharpening them, parroting them, and throwing them back at them in a cool way.
Really a brilliant way to make it more digestible for people so that they can like learn, because a lot of people, if things are too heavy, they just kind of like shut out. But I feel like that's really brilliant way to do it.
Yeah. So, and it's like, you know, it also really proves my parallel of growing up in a cult and being in the military, because it's all this like 90s kitschy Christian rock, but it's also marching songs because we were also supposed to be little soldiers in the army of God. So like my opening song, that's all the cult members singing, heaven's girls and heaven's boys making such a joyful noise. It fits perfectly on the army side when it's armies, girls, and armies, boys, quit making such an awful noise.
I don't know. That reminds me of like being raised Baptist and like like hearing their music and stuff. Sometimes it was like I felt like Jesus was like pretty sexually charged. Like there's like some undertone of
So
that
you're gonna
going
love
on.
this because when I have right before the basic training song, I bring out sexy youth pastor and sexy Marine recruiter, and they give you their pitches, and then they tell you, what? Didn't you know that there's always a sexual aspect to recruiting?
I feel like your cult took it real literal in the part where they had the fishing,
The
the
flirt, right? So
flirty
they took it the
fishing.
most liberal with flirty fishing. They call themselves heaven's harlots, absolutely prostitution. But one of the things that I say growing up after they technically stopped that practice was they never stopped. They just
Yeah,
stopped making them go to the actual sex. But like I,
yeah,
from
like
the
it's
age of
still
5 years
there.
old, was hung out as pretty cute blonde girl to draw you in. Like it was always the same tactics that they
You
were
were the
using.
skinny white woman.
White woman. Um, I should also say that I'm also 10 chapters into a 15 chapter book called An All-American Fascism. So I'm still writing very serious stuff about bad guys. I'm just also doing creative work as well.
Where can we watch the musical when it's done?
I don't know yet because right now it takes $10 million to put a musical on, and I don't have that, but
Oh,
I have
wow.
about 1 million people that want it. So we are just producing it as we can. And in fact, I'm creating lines of jewelry to sell in order to fund the mixtape. And that's where we're starting is I'm going to do a 3-series mixtape. What I would love to do is debut it in Salt Lake City, Utah on January 20th, 2020.
Oh, we'll fly out there for that.
Yeah,
No, I would go.
you gotta find
And,
sponsors.
I mean, the thing is,
What
I
about
came
the
up
South
with the
Park guys?
concept. I came up with the concept of writing a musical because I was at Hamilton on Broadway and I was like, oh, I need to be on that stage. This is the culmination of my life in the performance cult. But since I've been working on this for almost 2 years now, literally everyone who has heard it is like, we have to do this. We have to have this. And people want to be involved. And so I realized that performance is a theme of the performance because a performance is a theme of all cults. Shut down your emotions and perform and work. And so it turns out all the cult babies and all the veterans want to come be on my stage. And so I'm just trying to build the cult musical that already has a cult following without making it a cult and exploiting anyone. So I'm just still figuring out that process, but I don't take free labor. I pay everyone for their time and their work. And so far, we're building a really cool thing. And our first complete song is called "Cults Always Promise Space Travel," and it's so fun.
What about seeing if the South Park guys will sponsor you? Because they did one about the Mormons.
They did the Book of Mormon,
and they seem pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, they also seem like Republicans, or at least they keep joking about it. So I don't know that they're exactly going to be that interested. But
they were like satiring Republicans.
their whole last season, though, they've been taking down like the MAGA and whatnot. I forget what number season it was. There was a season in there where they were kind of like, because they've always claimed to be libertarians, which, yeah, I consider libertarians like diet Republicans, but yeah.
I mean, my elevator pitch has always been it's the Book of Mormon, but for all cult babies. And I would be very happy to connect with them. But I'm just building it and hopefully the people come and the sponsors come.
Yeah.
Well, if it's in Salt Lake City, we'll definitely.
I know. I want to go.
I want to try to think of people to network with to get it going.
But we can talk about this off air. I know it's Saturday. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday. We know you're very busy and stuff like that. We really appreciate it. We love both books on it, and hopefully you'll come back to promote the musical.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for talking to us today.
All right. Well, enjoy the weekend, and we will talk to you another time.